So like we talked about, so inside of here, we've now mocked random.choice, but this relevant tweets is still doing an API call. So we would have to be online in order to run this code. We would have to, in order to run this test code. And if we're out of like API keys or something, then that would suck. It just wouldn't pass. We don't want tests that are flaky. We don't want tests that are just gonna not deterministically always pass. So one way that we get around this is doing similar mock stuff, just like we did here, but inside of get relevant tweets. So before I show you how to do that, I'm going to clean up my environment a little bit, make it easier for everyone to see. So I'm just going to get rid of that, and I'm going to move Twitter query over here so that you can see side by side Twitter query test and Twitter query. One thing I want to warn you about is this demo is going to move a little fast, even faster than usual, to be honest, and it's going to require a little bit of intimate knowledge about Python, and I'm going to do my best to explain along the way so that you don't get lost or anything like that. But if you do get lost, that's okay. You can always view the code again at github.com/lect4-complete, I think it is. Yeah, lect4-complete, lect14-complete, sorry. So go ahead and view that there if you need to. Okay, so now let's go back down to here. So inside of relevant tweets, we want to mock out the API results. So let's take a look at what get relevant tweets is doing. So first of all, it's taking in all these different things, keys and all that stuff, and then a query and a count. The first thing it does is make an API, and then it uses the API. So this is just like an auth token, basically. And then using this API, it's basically running api.search. So this is the actual API call. Then we're getting our relevant tweets, and then we're iterating over that pretty much. We're not getting our relevant tweets. We're instantiating that as an array. We're iterating over our API results, and then we're adding all these fields. Now, one thing to note is it says the result dot text. So that means that result is some class. It's not some dictionary or something, it's some actual object class. And same with author, so result.author must be some object class that has a screen name attribute. So then we're basically iterating over all of our results, putting some like manipulation of that data into relevant tweets, and then printing that out. So if we look at this closely, we can see that there's only one line that we really have to mock here, and that's the API call. So that's line 36, api.search. So what we want to do is first figure out what type api.search is. So right here we said random.choice because it was from the package random. So we had import random up here somewhere. I'm not even seeing that. Why am I not seeing that? Oh, we don't need that because random.choice isn't being imported. But we needed to figure out what package and what API. So inside of here, we have to do the same thing. So we know it's something.search. So first of all, let me write this out. So inside of our test code, sorry for the context switch, but let's figure out where we're going to do the mock call. So we want to do the mock call right where we're doing the get relevant tweets, because we're basically saying run this function, but we want to mock out something inside of there. And the specific thing that we want to mock out is the API call. We can make the actual auth token. It's fine if we do that. We just don't want to actually use it because then that could count against our quota and that could result in other things. So instead, we're going to have a hard-coded mock data call. So let's go ahead and say inside of here, this is where our mock stuff is going to happen. So I'm going to go ahead and say with mock.patch to do, and then let's give it a name. So let's say self mocked get relevant tweets, something like this. Cool. And then inside of here we can, we don't want mocked get relevant tweets, we want mocked API search. So something like this, because this line again, line 36 is the one that we want to mock, which is API search. Not the entire thing, just this single line. So with that, we want to run all this code. So that's our first step, and now we have to fill out what this to-do is. So we have to figure out what object this is calling, basically. So the way that we're going to do that is basically figure out that, okay, it's api.search, but API is a variable. So first I'm going to put api.search, but we have to figure out what API is. So API is the result of auth up here. And we're calling auth, so you can actually do a command click or a control click. That's going to take you to what auth is. So it's returning API. And API is equal to this. So API equals tweepy.api. So let's go ahead and take tweepy.api and replace API here with that. So if that makes sense, basically what we're doing is saying, what is this thing? Like we want to figure out what auth is returning because this is the thing that, or sorry, we're trying to figure out what api.search is returning. So API is whatever auth returns. And when we look at what auth is returning, it's returning API, which is a type of object called tweepy.api. So we're doing tweepy.api, which is what auth is, and then we're doing .search. So that's why we're mocking out tweepy.api.search and replacing it with whatever our result is. So now let's go ahead and define our function. So this is going to be just like before, get mocked API search. And we have self inside of here, and then all of these different values. So we're doing search, so we want to have the same exact variables that we had before. So we have a queue for query and a count. Cool. But now we're not actually going to use these because we're just going to hard code some data inside of here. Now we have to figure out what our data is expected to look like, what format the data should look like. So our data should look like the format result.text, result.author.screenname, and stuff like that. Okay, so basically we want to return some object that has, some things inside of it. So to be more specific than that, we want to, let's say that we have some object called a mocked search response. And then inside of this is basically going to contain, a text attribute, author.screenname, source URL, and created at. And I'm just pulling that directly off of what we're actually doing for each of those results. And actually, now that I look at it, it's saying api.search is actually returning some list that we're iterating over. We're doing 4 resultant results. So this should actually return an array of mocked search responses. Okay. And then each of these mock search responses should contain each of these different attributes. So in order to make that class, we actually have to create it. So let's go ahead and do class mocked search response. And then we're going to have an init. So this is Python-y stuff. Basically, you have to have an init that takes in some variables. I'm going to put a to-do in here because we don't know what we want inside of here. But we do know that it contains these different fields. So let's go ahead and say self.text equals something, self.author.screenname equals something. I don't know if you can do that, but we'll get back to that. Self.sourceURL equals this thing, and self.createdAt equals this thing. And the easiest way to do this is just hard code feed in the data. So let's just go ahead and say text, screen name, source URL, and createdAt. Okay. So now we can just say that self.text. So the instance, like the method, the attribute within the object is just going to be whatever we instantiate it with. And then same with screen name, source URL, and createdAt. Now the problem that we have is self.author.screenname we want to be equal to this. But self.author.screenname, again, self.author is a type of class and not an actual dictionary or something like that. So we need to create another mocked class. So let's make this a class mocked author response. And then this is just, all this has to have is a screen name. So I'm going to do another init inside of here. And then just have screen name passed in. Okay. And then basically this is just going to say self.screenname equals screen name. And now instead of self.author.screenname down here, we're just going to say self.author equals screen name, except we want to make an instance of that mocked class. So we're going to do something like this. Self.author equals mocked author response with the screen name. So just to summarize what we've done and just to re-explain everything that we did. So what we did was we said that we want to mock out this search result because we don't want to send an actual API call. So in order to mock out this search result, what we're going to do is figure out what type that this should return. And that type is basically some object that contains all of these attributes. So this dot notation in Python means it's an object that contains those attributes. So first of all, we know it's iterating over that, so it's an array of that result, which is why, again, we have an array of those different results. And then within that, we basically say we're going to create a new object, which was, in our case, a mocked search response. It's going to have text, author, source URL, and created at. And within the created at, it's just going to also, within the author, we're also going to have a screen name attribute. So that's what we've done so far. And then inside of here, we can pretty much put whatever different fields we want. So inside of here, let's go ahead and copy and paste these different things that we had. So I'm going to copy and paste Biggie Smalls. That's going to be our first result, I think. Let's see. That's going to be text. Okay. So that doesn't actually matter, I don't think. Yeah, we don't need that. We just need to say what the expected values here are going to be. So the first one I believe was content, or text, sure. So the text is just the content of the tweet. So let's just say this is a mocked tweet for now. The next one is going to be the screen name. So this is going to be Trisha Scott 99. But notice here that in line 40 we append an at. So we don't want an at here because then it would say at. So we just want Trisha Scott here. And then our code is going to do the at manipulation and add that stuff in for us. And now we have the source URL. So let's go ahead and take this. And then we get to the tricky one. So let's talk about that. Let me do some cleanup of the code before we get there. Now we have the tricky one, which is the date URL. The problem is this date shouldn't just be a string because we're doing date.stringftime. And I had to look this up, but basically this means that this date is a datetime object. It's not just a string, it's an object of type datetime. So we want a datetime object that represents this. And I had to look up how to do this, but basically the way that we do that is we do datetime.datetime.strp_time, and then you copy and paste that string. Oops, I have two sets of quotes. And then we type in a new string, basically that is, the second argument is going to be this thing inside of our code. So it's basically saying what format that should be in. Okay? And then we have to import datetime inside of here. Okay. So again, the reason we had to actually fill in this datetime in this format was basically that we want to take our string from our expected value and then basically say that we want to convert it back into a datetime object. Because then once this actually results, once API.search returns that result, we're going to do our parsing logic inside of here. And this parsing logic is basically going to figure out how to convert our datetime object into a string. So now we have an object that is going to be returned. So just to be clear about what we've done so far, and let me clean this up a little bit. Okay, there we go. So the way that, what this is basically doing is saying that when we hit line 36, and I'll actually prove this in a moment, but basically when we hit line 36, instead of actually doing an API call, it's just going to redirect because of this line. It's basically going to just be like, hey, don't do this line. Don't do 35. Just replace this with my mock call. So it's basically going to comment out this line and instead run API equals test get random tweet success and do all that stuff instead. So it's basically just taking out this line and replacing it with this. But it's going to run the rest of the code just fine because we didn't mock out any of that other stuff. So basically all we're doing is replacing this call with this call on line 36. So let me replace that code. And then let's actually set a breakpoint, and I will actually show you that this is actually happening, and I think it will be an interesting moment. So let's go ahead and set a breakpoint here. Actually, let's go ahead and set a breakpoint here. Okay, now I'm going to go ahead and run my tests. I'm going to turn my debugger on. Let's go ahead and run it. Okay, so now we're seeing API equals auth whatever. So instead of stepping over it, we're actually going to step into it, which is going to basically show us what function is being called. And instead of calling the Twitter API, it's actually going to go right into this function. So isn't that crazy? Like instead of calling auth here, or sorry, this line is going to be fine. So let me actually step over this line. Instead of calling search here, it's going to go into our mocked API search. And it's all because of this line, line 64, where we're saying instead of calling tweetb.api.search, call mocked API search. So it's going to go to this, this function. So when I step in, boom, it's actually going into our function instead of going into the API call. So let's go ahead and step over this. Okay, we're making that object. And then let's go ahead and actually figure out what this looks like. So I'm going to delete all of these. And then let's actually figure out what results looks like. So results is some mocked thing, right? So relevant tweets is an array for result in results. So this is an array. So the first element in results is what we're looking at now. Content equals result.text. So let's go ahead and see what result.text is. So result.text is mocked tweet, just like we had before. Similarly, result.author, that's going to be some other thing. Let's figure out what that is. That's going to be a mocked author response. So result.author.screen name, let's figure out what that is. That is Trisha Scott, 99. Great. So let's keep going. And all of these should be filled in the exact same way we would normally. And then once we get to relevant tweets, we're just appending all these values after we're done parsing them. So I'm going to go and exit the debugger now. And then, or actually, let's see. Let's put a debugger here. I'm going to go ahead and skip to that line. Okay, so now at this point, we've basically put all of our tweets. We've gotten all of our relevant tweets. So let's go ahead and print out what relevant tweets looks like. So whenever we look at relevant tweets, now this is what this looks like. So we have content, mocked tweet, date, all this stuff. Cool. Not sure why I can't click into that, but trust me, that's all of the data that we had, and it's parsed in the right way based on all of these results. And then basically we're saying with random.choice, like with mocking random.choice into mocked random choice, get a random tweet. So again, instead of doing random.choice, we're going to go down to get random tweet, and then every time it says random choice or random.choice, we're just going to replace it with mocked random choice. So again, instead of running random.choice here, we're just going to run mocked random choice. So let's go ahead and see what mocked random choice does. And this was the same as before. We're just taking the first value in our array. So this only has one value for now, but it's going to return the first value. So basically, we're going to take the first value and be like, okay, that's what our random function returns. And then the expected, we still see that this is all of these values. And then basically, we can compare our author and our date and all that stuff. So let's go ahead and press play and make sure that that runs. Okay, it probably took too long, so let's turn off our debugger and rerun it. Boom, everything is okay. And now if we press this 100 times, it's always going to be okay. Now, one thing that you can also do now is we also have our contents now. So we can add our contents inside of there. So we had our key author. Let's go ahead and do our key contents. So inside of here, we can import key contents. We have that. And then let's put key contents inside of here. And this should still be the same content as here. Mocked tweet. We can just, instead of doing a assert equals, we can just do a assert dict equals, and we can just say expected. Expected should be the second argument. The actual should be the first one. So let's just go ahead and do random tweet and expected. I believe that should be right. Let's try that out. It didn't like that. Let's see what happened. Oh, missed a comma. Boom. Okay. So we just asserted that this dictionary is the same, random tweet versus our expected. And we can do that because we've mocked our different calls. Now you might be wondering, why is it okay for us to copy and paste values from our output, like what we expect, into our input? And the reason is basically that we're not trying to test the API call. We're assuming the API call works fine, and we're just trying to test our logic. So lines 37 to 49 is what we're trying to test. Not line 36, we're just assuming the Twitter API works, and they've written their own sets of tests for that stuff. So the real things that we're trying to test are basically, if I have a datetime object, am I converting it correctly? If I have Trisha Scott 99, am I appending the @ correctly? Am I returning it in a dictionary with all the right dictionary, with all the keys and values that I would expect? So all of that is what we're actually testing inside of here. And let's do one more thing, which is basically make sure we didn't change any code outside of our test code, because you should never change any of your function code in order to make testing easier. So let's do something like get status. And yep, the only thing that we've changed is our test code. And I actually misspoke a little bit. We're allowed to change our normal code to make our tests a little bit easier to write, but only by breaking it into methods that you can test more regularly. You shouldn't be like changing around your logic inside of here or anything just to make your tests work better or something and break your functionality. So this is how we're going to do our mocks basically. So instead of actually like calling from an API, instead of actually writing to a database, you're just going to use these different mock functions to figure out whether things are being hit or not. Similarly, for example, let's say that you want to test whether you're like at your limit for the day. Like let's say that you want nothing to have returned from here. So let's say that this returns nothing, results returns nothing. Right now your code doesn't handle that case, but we should have a failure case or a crash case that basically says, okay, if results is empty, then we don't crash the app, we actually handle that. We just print out something or return early or something like that. Right now, the code doesn't do that, and that's part of what your homework is going to be. Fix the code and then write a test to make sure it doesn't crash the app when that happens. That's about it for our mocked tests. I know that was a little intense to talk about like these different mocked classes and like doing all these mocked search responses, surrounding it with arrays, doing all this datetime stuff. But honestly, a lot of it is complicated. A lot of it is complicated because you have to figure out what types of data you're dealing with. And the best way to do that is using that debugger the way that I did. If you need any help using a debugger, feel free to come to office hours or ask on Slack about any of that work. So now we've basically had two different API calls that are mocked. We had tweepy API.search and random.choice. And then with that combination, we can deterministically determine what is always going to be printed out. One more thing that I wanted to point out is, so random.choice always returns the first, our mocked random.choice replacement always returns the first thing inside this array. So to prove it to you, let's go ahead and take this and then just copy and paste and fill in some random other garbage variables that we don't care about. So I'm just going to go ahead and fill in whatever I want here. Okay. Be careful with this one. Don't just replace it with random garbage because it will probably bug out on you. Cool. So now theoretically I'm doing random.choice, right? But I'm not actually doing a random.choice here because I'm mocking that out with this line, and I'm always going to be calling mocked random choice instead, which is always going to return the first value. So even though I have two values in here, it should always run and always return true for my test. So let's go ahead and test that out. It's always returning true. And that is the beauty of actually mocking these things out. You can control the non-deterministic factors, such as an API, such as random.choice. Like you can just control these different things that are usually out of your reach.